Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Finding Financial Fitness Show. I'm your host, Nino Gonzalez, joined in person. On my left, you're going to see Pei Chen, and on my right, finally, Mike Kwong. 41, I think we're on 41 episodes now, and we finally have you on. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
It's a special treat. Even I don't see him that much.
We'll see.
So this is Mike's first time on camera on this setup. Obviously, you were on the podcast with LSL, but if you see Mike looking at that way, it's because he's looking at the camera. But we're trying to just get used to the setup. But Mike, we are finally having you on. So Dibs on Your Money. This is a book that I've referenced multiple times on this show with Pei. We talked about kind of advanced strategies. We had Chris Bay from LSL on. We had Mike Everett from LSL on talking about intro to IBC with Chris Bay, and then we had mentoring with Mike Everett. You are the next level passive income stacking, combining it with IBC. So before we kind of really dive into it, how is it being married to Pei? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm here against my own will. So talk to me about the book. Why did you write Dibs on Your Money? What was the goal with it?
Sure. So really, it was not anything that was planned for. It wasn't like one of those bucket list items or anything like that. It was kind of just a result of notes that we had been kind of taking over the years as far as like what we've been building for Jackie, right? For our daughter. And it really was kind of just, like I said, a memo of what we were doing because it wasn't something, that anyone had really been doing before. I mean, something as novel, obviously, as IBC, same thing with, the income snowball. When you have those two things together. Yeah. So it was just chronicling like what we were doing, and kind of just taking notes, because a lot of what we do requires tracking anyways. Right. But, ultimately, it's just a guidebook as to, what to do with what we've been building for her, because many people aspire to passing on things, assets or, money, legacy and things like that to the next generation, real estate, even businesses. But there's no guidebook as to like how to manage it, right? Because you can get a whole bunch of money, and certainly, if the next generation isn't educated on it or have the values in place, that could be squandered quickly. So we wanted to guard against that. And that was part of the motivation. But beyond that, it kind of grew into something like, wow, this is really useful anyhow, just not just for Jackie, but it was an interesting kind of set of instructions that, Pei really recognized as valuable to the public, and we were like, well, why not? Let's put it together and put it out there. So
awesome. Yeah, I mean, and like you said, I'm sure you could have probably written a lot more about each individual topic. But I think just being able to merge them together is so important for people that kind of are starting out as well.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And that brings up a good point, because there's a million books on, finances. And one of the best and, most impactful for me was, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Right. And a lot of these types of books, as inspiring as they are, as, eye-opening, or, they don't necessarily have a step-by-step game plan, with investing, it's like, okay, invest in this, invest in that, and then you'll see what happens. Sure. Well, with what we do, it's very methodical. There's a formula almost to it. So that's very different. And I think helpful for a lot of people,
I almost say like it can be it's very simple. It's not easy. It's simple. It's not easy. But it's almost like sometimes when something is so simple, it can get people really confused, because it can't be that. It can't be that's it. 1 + 1 = 2. You're just that's all you're telling me, that's all I have to do, and I can reach financial freedom, and I can pass on a legacy. So people tend to overanalyze and make it more complicated than it really is. So that's why, when we were thinking about, like, he was asking me, like, we came up with like a ton of different names for the book title. Even the book title, Mike, you can talk about a little bit of it. Like, yeah. because it started with just like a simple title of money has to flow. I remember that was like one of the original titles, and then we talked about like maybe we just say like this is a letter to my daughter, right? But then that's too personal. So like you can talk a little bit about that journey of even coming up with that what's DIBS? What is DIBS? Yeah.
So DIBS stands for Dynamic Income Banking. As with the military, we love acronyms, and it's just another one. But DIBS has kind of multiple meanings, because DIBS on its own, at least in my generation, is like, yeah, I got DIBS, right? That means you've got ownership, or you got first rights, ownership, you got control. And that's something that we often lack with our money, right? Especially when we turn it over to money managers or throw it into the market and hope for the best. That's not control, right? So certainly if you have another way, and that's a big theme with infinite banking concept, whereas you actually can control your money in a means that you can then invest with and have a lot more security. But yeah, so DIBS stands for Dynamic Income Banking System. So dynamic refers to the monthly cash flow and the money moving within a system that you own and control. Income from the income stacking methods that's explained, and then banking through the infinite banking policies that we have set up to run those that through.
Right. So a question that I always get from people when I'm mentioning DIBS, one of the very first questions I've mentioned this to you before is people will ask, okay, I like both, I want to do both, where do I start? So oftentimes, so tell me about how you approach it when a client says, okay, I want an IBC policy and I want to start stacking. How do you know, what's your first questions to hear whether or not they should start an IBC policy or if they should go to stacking?
Sure. So great point. And you bring up something that is common for most people. You have two concepts. A lot of people don't have either one. When I wrote the book, and we wrote the book together, but when we came across it, we had both already. So it kind of put the two together. But more commonly, people won't have a policy or that system going. So if you're asking which one should come first, I mean, to be honest, you could do each independently, but when you can do them together, it's going to be better. Between life insurance and this investing in staggered notes, the difference is with life insurance, it's going to be based on your health and your insurability. And that's something that every year, no matter who you are, is going to increase in cost ever so slightly as we get older. With the investing strategy, doesn't matter how healthy or old you are. So in a sense, there's no rush. And that tends to move faster too, as far as the two systems go, right? You have the IBC, which is based upon, the whole life policy, starting with even one. I mean, that takes time to, get underwritten, to get approved for and to fund. So oftentimes, depending also whether you're like myself, a father, head of household, you have protections that you want to have in place. That often makes the most sense to start there.
I also feel like it depends on if you have some idle cash sitting around or not, and your cash flow amount, right? So for someone who maybe doesn't have any saving and don't even have a lot of cash flow, then starting an IBC policy is a little bit more of a challenge, right? Because the idea of IBC is to change the way we bank, right? And if you have nothing right now sitting in your savings account, you're not really banking. That's just the honest truth. So from my perspective, when people approach me and they have that same question, and I kind of sometimes help and jump in and help people kind of flush these ideas through as well. And I always just look at like, okay, if you have already been a good apprentice of banking, where you have already been very diligent and disciplined to save money. Actually, like Dave Ramsey people, followers are great for doing that because they've already developed that discipline of putting their monthly cash flow in some sort of savings account. And they have already amassed a significant amount where now it's just sitting there. They just need to activate it. We want to turn lazy dollars into active dollars, right? So that will be a great example of, okay, let's get your bank, your private bank started, your IBC system started, and then redirect that cash flow into the income stacking method. That way you can start both at the same time. But for someone who are just getting the whole concept of self-banking started and don't have that cash flow, then starting a bank and trying to do the income stacking may be a challenge. And that's when one example we see will be someone that it should probably start the income stacking first, get that income going, get that volume of funds bigger, then they can.
That's what we talked about on one of the shows, was we talked about how we can use the income stacking system to then open the IBC policy. We covered this on a few episodes ago, and I think you had mentioned that if the person has no savings, no money they can tap into, then starting with let's say their stack size is $2,500 or $5,000, building that up, get that momentum going. Once you're, and this was going to ask you next, what size do you think is and I know it's not a one size fits all thing, but what size do you think is reasonable for someone to get their first IBC policy?
Well, again, with an IBC policy, it's a whole life policy, right? So a lot of times people will default to looking at the death benefit as a measure of protection. And that's certainly valid, right? Traditionally speaking, some people might look to, well, what is my outstanding mortgage, right? If something were to happen to me, I want my family to be covered so that at least that will pay out and they don't have a house to have to continue to pay for. Other people, look to the income, whatever the income is, right? Times so many years, you can take that calculation. But if you're asking about premium size, that's another end of the conversation where that would directly impact how much, cash value or leverage that you can start off with. If your aim is to open a policy to start doing the income stacking with, then that's a different type of, equation that we would go through. Because either way you put it, either way you look at it, the death benefit's going to increase. So even if that death benefit isn't ideal or what you want off the bat, it'll grow into it. That's different than, say, a term policy that is stagnant, for the 20 years or 30 years that you have it.
And I think one of the questions that people sometimes will have is, okay, I've built up the stack. Now it's time to open up. Let's say it's a $10,000 stack. And now they're going to use it to fund their IBC policy premiums. The number one question and the number one, I wouldn't even call it a concern, because if you know, but the number one concern is always, well, I have to quote unquote sacrifice because it's a 40-60 design. So talk to me about the design of the policy and why Nelson talked about that 60-40 design as opposed to these 90-10s out there, because this is controversial, but
Perfect. So thanks for that question, because this is something that's getting a lot of static, we call it nowadays. When we first look at a policy, right, it's a whole life policy. It is a permanent asset. It's personally one of my favorite permanent assets. It is literally for life with guarantees built in. So understand that whether you build it, for the first year's utility or, for the first 4 years, it's something that has to perform, in our opinion, for the whole life of it. So to that end, we set up the base premiums, and I'll talk about that. Base premium and is the premium that you would pay, just like in any insurance, that pays for the protection. In this case, the base premium is for the life of the policy and is guaranteed. And that's great because these policies are simply contracts. Remember, these are privately entered into contracts between you, me, the policy holder on one end, and then the insurance company on the other. Okay, that's it. There's no government interference. There's no involvement, no treasury, no SEC oversight. And because of that, it is completely tax-free. It is tax-free from the first year to the last year, all the way through distribution at, the insured's death. So that's great. We want to maintain that. So, but that's what the base premium's for. The other piece to a premium that's special for IBC policies is the PUA. We call that the paid up additions. And this is kind of, similar to buying points down on your mortgage to increase the equity, early on. So there's those two important components, right? The base premium and PUA. Now, as far as like, how much do I pay for each? You put, hit the nail on the head with that, call it the 40-60. Base premium would be the 40%, 60%, for the first 4 years we can afford to put into the PUA. And the reason we do that is because you have to understand the relationship between the base and the PUA. If you think of a shuttle on the launch pad, right? The launch pad, the shuttle is the most important. That's mission control, where all the 5 astronauts sit. That'll be your base premium. That is constant from the first launch to the end of the mission. It's got to come down for it to succeed. That's your base premium. The PUA, think of it as the booster rockets. Okay, certainly important to get your shuttle and your policy off the ground and capitalized, but not forever. You don't need it forever. What happens once the shuttle gets up out of the atmosphere? Right, the boosters fall off. Similarly, we build our policies so that that 60% extra that you're overfunding the base premium with through the PUA certainly goes in and floods the policy with available cash value, which is great, that you can start doing stacks with or investing or paying down debt, but is temporary. And so we have that build where it's 40% to the base, because the base premium is the backbone of the policy. That's important from day 1 to year 7 to year 17, all the way through. The PUA, however, we can afford to drop off later. And we actually have to in order to respect the MEC, which is
almost want it to drop off, right? Think about it. Once you're in a zero gravity environment where, that's why it drops off, because if you keep it on, it becomes dead weight, to your system. So you want to be as efficient later on as you can once you're in orbit, right?
Yeah. So Nelson always taught us to build it early, but not too aggressively, right? You want to have that extra oomph, and 60% is still admittedly a majority of your annual premium. But when you go to 60%, that maintains a strong shuttle and base. Some other, outfits out there, there's 80-20 or 90-10. Okay, that's great. Bigger boosters is always rah, great. But what they're forgetting is they got to kick off 3 of those astronauts, shrink that shuttle down. And ultimately, remember, the shuttle's the most important. It's got to go and perform all the way through. The PUA, you're going to drop off anyways.
I joke. Those people who want to do, and it's going to be controversial, and you can come after me, whatever. Hashtag I don't care. I joke, those people who are sold on the 90-10 is because they're still afraid of IBC. They still don't understand it. So they're like dipping their toes into IBC, but they are truly still a buy term and invest the difference type mentality.
Well, it is a mentality difference. And if you remember, if you read Nelson's book, near and dear to all of us, the first, principle is to think long-term. Think long-term. So what does that mean? Do we want it to just perform for the first year or 3? No, we want it to perform solid from the beginning all the way through the end. And that requires, a significant base premium, because that also affords you more room throughout the life of the policy. What's wrong with that? You don't want something to shoot up there and then blow up once it gets out there because you ran it too close to the sun, like Icarus, right? You run it too hot. That's what potentially happens. And not all agents even understand the MEC limitation, right? So the MEC is that modified endowment contract. And that's something that, again, as long as we stay within the certain cash values, limit to the ratio to the death benefit, we're okay. That's what, remember, allows the policy to be tax-free. Once you go too aggressive and have too much cash value versus the available death benefit or the death benefit in any given year, especially early on, then you risk like running afoul of that MEC limit and losing the tax, free status on it.
There's people out there and companies out there that will say, well, don't worry about the MEC because you'll be so rich you could pay the taxes associated with the MEC. Well, it begs the question, why would you want to pay the taxes on it? Why? Because we're trying to do these things simultaneously, right? Why would you want to sacrifice the growth of one, hoping that the passive income stacking can take care of the taxes from here? The whole purpose of building a bank and building a bank with IBC is for the long-term growth and the tax-free growth. If you're then changing the whole mechanism, it's not IBC anymore, right?
That's right. You're putting the cart before the horse, right? Because people get obsessed about the whole investing aspect of, IBC. But the whole point, first of all, before, you talk about investment, is to have a secure foundation for your capital. And once you have that set up, then you can continue to invest in whatever that asset class is. But you do so from a much safer position, right? They focus on, but I get an extra 30 or 20% to that I invest in. But what if that blows up? And certainly not all investments are guaranteed. We've had some that, recently have suffered, that. Well, guess what was set? That base premium, okay? That death benefit. Now that you only have that 10% if you aggressively funded it, that's safe. Whereas with the 40/60, you've got that 40%. And then you have every year that you can continue to, bank with. So it really boils down to mentality and remembering why you have the policy. This isn't an investing tool. This is a way to control your capital and to make sure that your capital is safe first, safeguarded, and tax-free.
I understand why. I mean, it's when you understand the mechanics and you realize and hopefully one of these days we'll have you run through like a policy illustration, mine or Jane Doe's, whoever it is, to see by year 10, year 15, year 20, and you start seeing all this growth, you start thinking, well, I want that. Once you fully understand it, you're like, well, I want that now, and I want to stuff it all in, and I want to stuff it all in for the full 15 years. So what's the number one solution to people who want to put more money into one single policy? If they want to continue to get that to grow, what would be the best solution?
Well, definitely it would be education. And that's not obvious, right? I know what you're talking about strategy-wise, but ultimately it really is education. Like Warren Buffett says, like Nelson agrees, right? What's your most important investment? Is it real estate? Is it currency? No, it's in yourself, exactly, in learning. And again, that goes to your point, though, to be serious. When you understand, again, the principles and the concepts at play, then the numbers will work themselves out. But if you're missing that, component of the philosophy and the, concept, the numbers won't save you.
Yeah. And a lot of people I find are stuck on product comparison that I find, right? They will compare, oh, this company XYZ is giving dividend rate of 0.5%, 0.25% higher than the other one. Or they will be like, well, this company's loan rate is, only at 6.25%. Your company is at 6.5%. So this is obviously a better, so they're comparing the dividend, they're looking at all the matrix that are designed for the investment world, in my opinion. So you can
sure. So you bring up a great point as far as the different metrics that that people can rate or compare companies or policies against, right? Off the top of my head, there's 4, right? There's the dividend rate. Okay, that's the one that many people like compare against with companies. Then there's the actual dividend every year that is paid out. And then there's the death benefit. And then there's the cash value. How do you determine, among all these different metrics, what's most important, right? Well, I think that for IBC purposes, most people every year, how much can they use from their policy? It's not going to be the dividend rate. It's not going to even be the dividend. The death benefit's not for you or your family until you pass. It's the cash value every year. Okay, so among those 4, the cash value is, the most important. But ironically, that's kind of the last metric that is kind of calculated when every year you go through an anniversary, right? So let me walk through real quick, if I may, how these are all interconnected. So the dividend rate is something that is announced every year that all these companies, will announce and use in order to reinvest into the company and the policy's growth. Now, historically speaking, by the way, most of these whole life mutual companies have rates between low 4% to about 6%. So it's not a big wide range of rates in the first place. But that dividend rate, again, is every year at the anniversary applied against your policy's cash values. Okay, whatever your cash values is, that dividend rate will apply against. And then the product of that will be your actual dividend. And that'll pay out normally as cash, right? Whenever you talk about dividends for stock companies, they pay quarterly, maybe annually, but they pay in cash. With an IBC style policy, the big difference is that the dividend is instructed to immediately repurchase on your benefit extra PUA, paid up additional insurance. And this is without extra fees or underwriting. Doesn't matter if you're uninsurable even. The PUA will automatically buy you more death benefit. Okay, well, death benefit, again, is great for the family. But what about the cash value? Well, because the death benefit increases, the cash value necessarily increases by even more that year. And this is a really interesting, relationship, because a lot of people also confuse cash value and death benefit. Okay. I want to use another example. I was a teacher for many years, and we use, metaphors, and this is useful, I think. If you think of a tree in the late afternoon, okay, your policy has a death benefit. That first day, it's live, it's real, it's for the, protection of the family. That tree is going to be nice and tall. That's your strong, protection. That death benefit is X amount high. Now, in the late afternoon, it's going to cast a long shadow. Okay. Now, the first year your policy's open, you could be 40 years away or whatever, right? Think of it 40 feet away from the tree. How tall is the shadow going to be? Your cash value is also known as the surrender value, right? And that's an important term, because that literally means it is the surrender value of that death benefit. It's literally the present day value of the future death benefit. Okay, so think about it. If you're far away from that inevitable event in the future, it won't be worth that much. But what happens to these policies? They're built this way. Every year you anniversary, you march another foot, another yard closer to the tree. Well, what happens to your shadow as you get closer to the tree? It just gets taller and taller because the shadow's cast already. Okay, and that's what happens as we as every year approaches. The cash values have to grow. They have to, because it's a reflection of that future death benefit that is each year closer to being realized. On top of that, every year, because of the PUAs, because of the dividend that's buying you more death benefit, the tree grows taller. So if you could see, not only is it going along this continuum getting taller, but every year, the death benefit, the tree is getting taller. So that shadow is also getting taller. So you've got two things driving, the growth of these policies that is really powerful, because they're already actuarially guaranteed. They're built into the way these contracts work. Yeah.
And I mean, there's so much to unpack. I think you explained that so thoroughly. And I think it has to do a lot with, because the question then becomes, when people understand it year 4, when the PUA drops off, people want to know, why can't I put more in? And based on what you were saying, it's okay, the dividend is reused to get more cash value. And if you then overfund here, if the dividend, some Utah, if the dividend performs extremely well, you're limited by how much PUA you can put in.
Yeah, I mean, so you're always going to be limited by the PUA. And the thing about that MEC limit, okay, I call it a moving target. And it's kind of, I mean, it's true, because it's based on that moving target of the death benefit. And, anytime when you put in extra PUA or extra cash value into a policy, you're going to be hitting, closer and closer to that limit, that MEC limit. And the thing is, when you look at these policies, illustrations, right? We call them illustrations. That's the proposal that we look at that has these assumptions about the death benefit and the cash values growing based on the dividend rate. Those are going to change over time. We do have guaranteed base premiums. We do have guaranteed death benefit, but the dividend rate is the only thing that is not necessarily fixed and stagnant or guaranteed. And that can go up or down. So long story short, when we front load these PUAs, right, the way we build it is for the first 4 years, typically, okay, we'll add to that 40%, that extra 60. Over those 4 years, what you're doing is you're boosting the policy, you're front loading it, or like priming the pump. If you think about an old pump at a farm, right, you gotta pump it a couple times. By that 4th year, you got enough momentum in that you can stop pumping, and the back pressure from the pipe will start flowing the water. And then from there on, it's going to be free flowing and ever more efficient, to the point where, even the base premium alone, when you drop off the PUA, is going to net you typically more additional cash value than you put in for it. So that year, it's, typically what we call positively geared. And that's why we do it that way over 4 years. You can't do it all in the first year. You're going to run too hot and you'll MEC the policy, right? If you do too long, well, you'll lose out on that, momentum early on that you could use and get invested with. So there's always a happy medium that we found to work.
Projections that are on the illustrations, on the what they project, what's that based on? Is it based on like the average dividend rate historically?
Sure. So all of these illustrations, no matter the company across the industry, what they'll have is a set of guaranteed numbers and then a set of non-guaranteed numbers. And non-guaranteed is not bad, but let's start with the guaranteed numbers. That is based on the fact that just the guarantees of the policy. Remember, you have the guaranteed base premium and the guaranteed death benefit. Okay, and that's going to grow based on your contributions, your premiums. But the guarantees assume zero dividend. Okay, because remember, those aren't guaranteed. Yeah, but now, to be honest, though, for most of these good whole life companies we would recommend to work with, they've been paying dividends for over a century straight, every single year, through the Great Depression, through World War I, World War II. So although it's not guaranteed, it's like, is the sun guaranteed to grow, come up tomorrow? Not technically. I can't find any language guaranteeing that, but it's probably going to happen, But all jokes aside, that's the difference. On the non-guaranteed side, all of these illustrations, what they're showing is the difference of a dividend. And they're always going to take the present year dividend and then assume that for every single year. Now, is that possible to change the next year? Absolutely. Maybe it'll change 10 or 20 years down the road, but it's definitely not going to be the same every year. Okay. But would anyone agree that certainly those numbers are going to be more accurate or closer to the real performance than the zero every single year? That's like the worst case scenario from year 1 to 2 every single year down the road.
Yeah.
So
the reason why I bring that up is it reminds me of, when we talked about something that you guys both did that just kind of blew my mind with the passive income stacking, is showing how you can borrow at an interest rate. And there's others out there who do not understand this concept, but you can borrow at a 10% interest rate and put it into an investment that's paying you 0%, just returning your principal. This reminds me of, if you wanted to be like the extreme conservative person using the DIBS methodology, you could go on the guaranteed values and on the 0% return passive income stacking, and you'd still grow your income stream. You could just be the most conservative. But if, of course, most investments we get into hopefully are paying more than 0%. And of course, there's going to be a dividend one way or another, but that's just icing on top of the cake. And the reason why I bring all of this up is because I think the point that I wanted to make is it's so important to get policy illustrations with the people you're meeting with, but B, and the underrated value of it is the coaching. Because I remember when we first did my first policy, you sent me the policy illustrations and I'm going through them and I'm like, okay, well, what are the, year 15? And I'm thinking I'm understanding it. Not until I sat down with you, I had a call with you, that I realized, okay, what does this specifically mean? And what do I have to rely on to hope that it'll grow by this rate? And having the conversation right now, that's where coaching is huge. That's where the policy illustrations come in.
Yeah. And perfect point. You talk about that comparison of, 10% versus a 1 or no percent, and how does that even work, right? Remember, and I talk about it in my book, that it's not about the numbers as much as the nature of the investment or the debt that you're using, because you could buy debt as an investment too, right? But the 0 and the 10%, what makes the difference is the fact that one is a simple interest, right? If you're leveraging something that costs you 10% or 5% or whatever, but it's simple interest for a short period of time, you can afford to earn something that's 1 or 2 or even 0% interest, but over a longer period, because that would be amortized. And that's where it's like, I'd rather pick a 3-legged cheetah over, like a fast snail any day of the week. The fastest snail you can come up with, I will still take the 3-legged cheetah. I'm sorry. So again,
Today is science lesson, not math.
But that's what I mean. The nature is more important than the numbers themselves.
And Pay and I have talked multiple times about the recycling of money and the fact that it's amortized, but because we're using the same money over and over and over again, the velocity is what's keeping it key. It's the velocity. It's not the same as accumulating. If you had to save.
And Warren Buffett, like him or not, the saying that he has is very profound, right? The rules of investing. Number 1 is don't lose your principal. Number 2 is not to forget rule number 1. He never said the rule of investing is high rate of return. It's not. It's a return of principle. Think about it.
As you can see, guys, just the team that we have here with Pei and Mike, and with the book and everything that you guys have done has been great. We're gonna have a potluck right now with a community of people that you guys have built, where we can get together and do this and talk about this. So we're gonna leave it here because I know that there's so much more we can get into, and we'll have you back on the show. There's a lot of technical questions that I want to bring you on for, but I think so far this is the deepest dive that I've gone on IBC, and this is just barely touching the surface. But I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of people who will talk about IBC, and I think a lot of them need to listen to this podcast, just this specific episode, to hear about the fundamentals of it. Because if you don't understand it, then it will make everything else. If you're building a house on a rocky foundation, you're bound to fail. So, Mike, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you. We appreciate the book. We're looking for the second book. We're gonna...
Okay. I know.
We're gonna be waiting for it. Pei, anything you want to wrap up with?
No, this is fun. This is actually my first time talking about DIBS in this setting, like with Mike. I mean, we've done a couple podcast interviews together, but like to kind of dive into DIBS, that's kind of a topic near and dear to us. And anyways, we're here to support anybody who's interested to learn it, right? Anybody who's coachable, I'm willing to teach it.
Yeah, and we'll drop in the show notes. We'll have your contact information for Life Success and League. If anybody again, I highly encourage set up a call with Mike. Ask the questions you want to ask to learn about if IBC is right for you, or if you have a policy and maybe you're not sure. Can I use it?
Absolutely.
People
I'd be happy to look at it and let you know what we've got. I mean, and that's something that I didn't mention, but I really love about what I get to do is to teach about this thing. It's not just making money. Everyone earns their money somehow, but what really brings joy to me is when people start to understand it. And if I've had a part in that, and you can ask me again and again, trust me, I'll tell you again and again, I'm here for you. So
yeah, no, right on. And we can all vouch for that. So we appreciate you, Mike. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Awesome. All right, bye.
Thanks everybody for joining. Stay tuned for the next episode of Finding Financial Fitness.